Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Jake and I'm very happy you tuned in today. In this video, I'm going to talk about some different techniques for using ferrocerium rods and the difference between harder composition rods and softer composition rods. So, I'm going to jump right into it right now. Now then, hard and soft. All right, what is the difference and why would that matter, right? I'm going to start with the hard one, right? So this is an Überleben Kraftig. This is the 8" by 1/2" version, and this is a hard composition rod. Right? This is a new one. Their older rods were softer, I do believe. But this is a new one. This was manufactured in Austria. Right? Austria and Sweden are the two places that you can get hard composition rods. This is a Light My Fire Swedish fire steel, made in Sweden, and this is also a hard rod. And if you're curious about the difference between the two, let's say you're like me and you are a fan of the Swedish fire steels from Light My Fire, this one from Überleben is maybe just a little bit softer than that Swedish rod. So quite hard, but really easy to use. It's a really good one. I like that quite a bit. Alright, now this one is a softer rod. This is a Bayite, got off of Amazon. It is 5" by 1/2". And the softer rods pretty much always come from China. Alright, now then, what's the difference in the composition, right? Ferrocerium is an alloy of various metals. The two top ones on the list usually are iron and magnesium. Right, the harder rods are going to have more things like iron. Softer rods are going to have more things like magnesium. There may also be some fillers in there, especially if you have a really cheap one, that are maybe not overly useful for creating sparks. They just make the rod a little bit softer. But generally that's the difference. Higher magnesium content, higher iron content. And I believe we'll just leave that at that. Now then, on to some different ways to use them. Right? So any ferro rod can pretty much be used in the same way. Right? There is one major difference, one specific technique that can only be used with the harder rods, and I'll get to that one here in a little bit. Right? But generally, any ferro rod can be used basically the same way. Right? Now, the first one I'm going to talk about, what I call the pin and pull method. Right, I'm going to hold a striker in my dominant hand, pin it there, and pull the rod back against that striker, creating sparks just like so. Right, so that's the softer rod. Here is the harder rod. Works very similarly. Right? Okay, there's one. Another one, I don't really have a name for this one, but essentially you plant the end of the ferro rod and drive the striker down toward whatever it is you're trying to ignite. Right? One tip I would provide on this method is to keep your knuckles down so that they hit whatever you're bracing the ferro rod against. Right? So if you notice, the ferro rod can only go so far. If I were to do it like that and go all the way down, still works, but do run the risk of flattening whatever you're trying to ignite with those sparks, right? And if you flatten it, you essentially are suffocating that flame that's trying to form, right? So that was a soft rod. Here is the harder rod. Do the same method here. Driving those sparks down works just fine, right? Here is a final method, one that I use a lot. This is probably the most used method in my ferro rod striking arsenal, and that is what I call the thumb assist. Right. And to do that one, essentially all you need really is about 1/2" on the end of the ferro rod, but this will not work with a soft one, but I'm going to do it with a soft one anyway, just to show. All right, so plant that there, strike. All I'm doing is scraping off ferrocerium and it's flying everywhere, right? But no sparks. If I do this with a harder composition rod, hold it right at the end, Give it a few strikes there. Lots and lots of sparks. That is probably the best way I know of to tell the difference between a hard rod and a soft rod if you're unsure. Generally, however, that is not allowed in stores, unfortunately, to test and see whether or not the rod is hard or soft. But you can pretty much figure that out also by where it comes from. As I mentioned, the softer rods almost always from China, and harder rods almost always from Austria or Sweden. So if it doesn't say it's made in Austria or it's made in Sweden, it's probably a soft rod. Alright, let's see here. Now then, there are some other methods. This one is pretty similar to what I showed in my last ferro rod video, where I showed using it with one hand, and that is to plant a striker like so and pull the rod back on top of the striker, just like that. That was a really big bit of ferrocerium that came off of there. You can see that works pretty well. There's the soft one. Here is the harder one here. Pull that back. Works great. That is actually probably a really good method to use if you have a Swiss Army knife with a saw on it, as many bushcraft and outdoor aficionados tend to have. Right? You can use the saw like so and create sparks. One issue with that, I don't know of any Swiss Army knives offhand that have a locking saw blade, so you do run the risk of closing that because you are applying force to the back of it, right? You can work around that by placing it down like so and then pulling it ferro rod across that spine just like that. That's probably the technique that I would go with if you were using something along the lines of the Firefly, which is a ferro rod that replaces the toothpick on the Swiss Army knife, or the Fire Ant, which screws into the corkscrew, because they're very small, very thin, probably rather delicate for serious striking. So I'd probably with those stick with this type of method where you place your striker and then you can brace the little ferro rod with your finger and drag it across like so. I believe that covers the methods pretty well. Now I'm going to scrape some of this fat wood into some piles here and actually ignite some things, because that's always fun. I like to light things on fire. A bit of a firebug. So I got 4 little piles of fat wood here. Very small piles, but this is just for demonstration. So don't need a whole lot. Looks pretty good. Now then, I'm going to use a softer rod on these first 3 piles here. I'm going to start with the pin and pull, right, just like so. I'm going to shoot this right into this pile right here, and hopefully none of the sparks bounce over into this one. See what happens. There we go. So that one's going, burning pretty good. Lots of nice black smoke. Put that one out. Alright, pin and pull works good. Now let's try this one right here. Drive them straight down onto there, and I'm going to keep my knuckles up. There we go. Nice. Works good. Alright, one more with this softer rod, and that one I'm going to drag the ferro rod across the top of this striker here. I'm going to set that striker right up in that pile and drag that and maybe make sparks. There we go. Works good. Nice. Final one. Thumb assist with the harder rod on this last pile here. If I can get a spark going. There we go. I missed. Fell off the side of the log. There we go. Fire going right there. Alright, so all 4 methods work quite well. Awesome. Now then, one final thing. All right. Let's say that you are having a hard time getting your fire going. The material's being stubborn, it's wet, whatever the case may be. But you're having issues, and you need a little extra oomph in your tinder. So here I've got this soft rod out again, and what I'm doing here is scraping nice and slow, nice and easy, so that I can create a pile of shavings that are not ignited. Don't want sparks yet, just shavings. I'm going to scrape this down, and I'm doing this because, as mentioned previously, one of the major elements in ferrocerium alloys is magnesium. And in these softer alloys, softer composition rods, the magnesium content is, I would say, exceptionally high. So I can just scrape off a bit there and make a little pile here and get some of that collected, just a little bit, into a pile. That's pretty good there, I think. Now then, this is the same concept as using a magnesium block, if you are familiar with those. And I'm just going to get back here and hit that with a spark. Lots of flame, exceptionally high heat output right there. And I believe that will be very helpful with stubborn materials. Now, really easy to do that with a softer rod. Not as easy to do with a harder rod, but it can be done. So I'm going to go ahead, move some of that out of the way, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to scrape very, very gently, very, very lightly, because it doesn't take nearly as much friction in order to create a spark with the harder composition rod. So I'm going to do this nice and easy, and this takes much, much longer with a harder rod than it does with a softer rod. For one, because you have to pay more attention, so you don't do that. And also, the material is harder, and so it comes off in much smaller pieces. The softer rod, you can scrape that material off, and it actually comes off in little shavings and little curls. The harder rod like this, it comes off more in a powder. I would say probably something like sanding dust from sanding wood. But it does work if you have the patience to do it slowly, so that you don't ignite the dust that you are creating. And also, I would say with either the hard or the soft rod, whichever one you're doing this with, once you get a little bit of a pile created, I would suggest moving to a different spot so that you can create another small pile. For instance, let's say that you are making a pile on a dead leaf, on a dry leaf. Make a little pile, get another leaf, make a little pile, get another leaf, make a little pile, and consolidate those. So that if you do ignite one, you don't have to start completely from scratch. Bit of a time saver. So I've got that. Now, throw a spark, and that was a little bit lackluster because that was a really small pile, but same concept, right? Create a little pile, ignite it. It burns very hot and very intense, more than you would get from a single spark, because essentially, right, you get that much spark out of one strike. If you scrape that much of the rod 10 times and then ignite that, you have 11 strikes worth of sparks and heat occurring simultaneously, so it's incredibly intense. The different techniques have their own pros and cons, their own benefits, and they might work better with certain materials than other materials, and they might work better with certain ferro rods than with different ferro rods, right? Using the pin and pull might work really well with so-and-so ferro rod with so-and-so tender, but it may not work as well with the same ferro rod with a different tender, or it may not work as well with the same tender with a different ferro rod, right? You got to play with it and figure out what works best for you with your specific materials, your specific ferro rod, and your specific take on the technique, right? But I'm gonna stop now because I think I'm done. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you maybe got something out of it. That's always very fun for me when people get something out of my videos. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed this video. Share with your friends, leave a comment down below, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not yet a subscriber. I'll greatly appreciate that. And also hit the little bell icon so you get a notification when I throw up a new video. And until next time, go forth, enjoy yourself, and always come home safe.